When a waitress quietly asked Keanu Reeves for a $50 tip, no one in the diner noticed, until what he did next changed her life, her brother's future, and sparked a movement no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The wind had started to quiet by the time Keanu pulled off Route 66, the hum of his motorcycle giving way to a stillness that felt almost earned. The sky over New Mexico was streaked in gold and burnt orange, a desert sunset folding itself gently behind the horizon. He hadn't planned on stopping, but after 200 miles and a silence that even the open road couldn't fill, the blinking neon sign caught his eye. Charlie's Diner, open 24 hours. He parked without fanfare, removed his helmet, and took a deep breath. No cameras, no fans, no one rushing up to ask for a photo or autograph. Just the familiar creak of the door and the soft jingle of a bell that sounded like it had rung for decades. Inside, the place was still. One couple sat by the window, speaking in hushed tones over coffee and pancakes. A trucker hunched over a plate of fries at the bar. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale warmth over cracked vinyl booths, and a jukebox that hadn't played a song all week. Keanu chose a booth in the back corner, out of habit, the kind of seat that lets you watch the whole room without being watched. He slid into place and set his helmet beside him, fingers brushing against the chipped tabletop. That's when he saw her. She moved like someone used to being invisible. Her name tag read Lila, though it was nearly worn through. Her apron was clean, her steps measured. No makeup, no performative cheer. Just a steady presence, gliding between tables with a carafe of coffee and a notepad that looked like it had been used down to the last page. When she reached his booth, she didn't pause or stutter. She didn't double-take or ask the usual question. She just looked him in the eye and said, "Coffee?" He nodded. "Yes, please." She poured. The coffee was fresh, hot, strong. He glanced up, expecting the usual smile, the nervous curiosity, the moment of realization that usually followed him around like a shadow. But Lila only said, "Let me know when you're ready," and walked away. No hesitation, no attempt to impress, no attention at all. It was the first real kindness he'd felt in weeks. Keanu watched her move through the diner with the grace of someone who had learned to make herself small without becoming bitter. She checked on the couple near the window, refilled the trucker's mug with a nod, and wiped down the same stretch of counter 3 times. Not because it needed cleaning, but because it was something to do between breaths. He opened the menu. It was laminated, smudged at the corners, offering a familiar lineup of burgers, meatloaf, and pie. But he wasn't here for the food, not really. He was here because the quiet of this place matched the quiet inside him. When Lila returned, he ordered a simple dinner. No substitutions, no questions. She wrote it down without asking for his name. As she walked away again, he noticed the tip jar near the register, a small glass container labeled in faded Sharpie. Inside, a handful of coins and a single crumpled dollar bill. It struck him not because it was empty, but because no one seemed to care. No reminders, no signs asking for generosity, just a jar, quietly waiting, like it had every day before. His food arrived 10 minutes later, hot, perfectly plain. Lila placed the plate down, asked if he needed anything else, then moved on before he could thank her. He ate slowly, savoring the stillness more than the meal. The occasional clink of silverware or shuffle of feet filled the room, but there was no soundtrack, no forced small talk, only the rhythm of survival. Halfway through his plate, a family entered, a father, 2 kids, and a tired-looking woman in a uniform from the gas station down the road. Lila greeted them with a quiet, "Hey there," and grabbed a high chair without being asked. Keanu watched the way she crouched beside the toddler, helping him settle in. How she smiled, just barely, when the girl asked for extra napkins. It wasn't performance, it was presence. She didn't radiate charm, she radiated calm, and in that moment, Keanu realized what felt so strange about her. She wasn't impressed by him, not because she didn't know who he was, but because she didn't need to be. She had other things on her mind, and that, more than anything, made him wonder what they were. When Lila came to clear his plate, Keanu looked up and said, "Thank you. That was exactly what I needed." She gave a small nod. Glad it hit the spot. He studied her for a moment. Her expression was unreadable, tired but not worn out, kind but guarded. There was a softness in her voice that didn't come from ease. It came from endurance. Before he could say more, she placed the check on the table. And then, almost as an afterthought, she said it. "If you're willing, would you consider leaving a $50 tip?" No tremble in her voice, no nervous glance, just a question. Direct, unapologetic, quiet. Keanu blinked, not out of offense, but because of the rarity of it. In all the places he'd been, hotels, red carpets, airports, no one had ever asked him like that. "50, he asked. She nodded once. "I know it's a lot. I won't ask again. Just figured I should try." No story, no pitch, no plea. She turned to walk away, but something in her voice hung in the air, like a faint echo. Keanu sat with it for a few seconds, then looked down at the check. It was neatly written, $12.89 for the meal. No tax error, no line drawn for tip. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a $100 bill, and laid it down with quiet care. Then, without another word, he put on his helmet, took one last glance around the diner, and stepped outside into the warm desert evening. The door chimed softly as it shut behind him. Lila stood behind the counter, watching him through the window. She didn't smile. She didn't rush to grab the bill. She just watched, as if she didn't expect anything more. And Keanu, sliding his gloves on beneath the fading sky, felt something strange rise in his chest. A voice that said, that wasn't just a question, that was a signal. He didn't know what came next, but something about the way she asked told him her story wasn't over. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth hearing. Keanu sat quietly in the booth, watching the final streaks of daylight stretch thin across the parking lot. The hum of the jukebox remained silent, the low murmur of other diners barely present beneath the steady ticking of the wall clock above the coffee machine. Something about this place held time still. It didn't feel like a restaurant. It felt like a waiting room. He finished the last sip of his coffee. It was lukewarm now, but he didn't mind. Lila returned with calm precision, her apron now smudged faintly near the waist, a sign she'd been wiping down tables or brushing against plates too quickly stacked. She cleared the empty dish without comment, set the check down face up, and reached for the mug. As her hand hovered over the cup, she paused, then looked at him. "Would you be willing to tip me $50? She didn't smile, didn't lean in or soften her voice. There was no sales pitch in her tone, no desperation, no apology. Just a question, clear, honest. Keanu looked up slowly, not startled, just drawn in. Her face was calm, but there was tension in the way she held her shoulders, like she was bracing for something. Her gaze didn't shift, didn't plead. It stayed steady, as if she'd rehearsed this moment a dozen times and decided this time she'd follow through. 50, Keanu repeated, not with suspicion, just curiosity. Lila gave a faint nod. He waited. She said nothing more, didn't launch into an explanation or offer a justification, just stood there, allowing silence to stretch thin between them. Finally, Keanu tilted his head. "Why 50? There was a pause. Then she answered, slowly, "My brother needs medication tonight. Insurance denied the refill because it's 2 days early. The pharmacist said I could pay out of pocket, but I don't have it. And I can't wait. Another beat. I won't ask again. I just had to try. Keanu didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. He understood what kind of ask this was. Not a scam, not entitlement. This was a last chance question, the kind you ask when you've run out of options but still want to hold your head up. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $100 bill, placed it on top of the check, then reached for his helmet. No tip line, no small talk, no expression. He nodded once and stood. Lila didn't thank him. She simply picked up the check, looked at the bill, and turned away. She walked back to the register, her footsteps even, her face unreadable. Behind the counter, she opened the drawer and made change like it was any other bill. No trembling fingers, no wide eyes. But the way she folded the receipt, carefully, perfectly aligned, said everything. She placed the change into the tip jar, every dollar of it. Keanu saw it as he passed by the door. The jar, once holding coins and a single crumpled bill, now had clean 20s sitting quietly in the middle. He paused for half a second, not long enough for anyone to notice, just long enough to wonder why. Outside, the desert wind met him again, brushing over the parking lot like a whisper. He adjusted his gloves, slid the helmet over his head, and fired up the engine. The motorcycle rumbled to life, but his mind didn't follow the same rhythm. That voice, that question, it stayed with him. Not the money, not the medication. The way she asked. He pulled out of the lot and merged back onto the road. The town fell away behind him in the rear view, a small glow beneath the darkening sky. Inside the diner, Lila stood behind the counter, eyes on the door even after it had closed. She didn't look relieved or proud. She just looked still, as if part of her hadn't expected him to give anything, and part of her hadn't expected herself to ask. One of the other waitresses, a woman named Jo, came up beside her. "You all right?" she asked softly. Lila nodded. "Yeah." Jo glanced at the jar. "That from him?" Lila gave the smallest shrug. "He paid." Who was that guy anyway? He looked familiar. Lila didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because it didn't matter. Jo walked away, and Lila went back to wiping down the counter. When the family from earlier stood to leave, the little boy ran up to her with a crumpled napkin. "You made me smile," it read in thick, shaky marker. She folded it and placed it in her apron pocket. That napkin would stay with her longer than the money, because money disappears. But being seen, even once, can change everything. She clocked out 2 hours later, walked to her car, and sat there in the dark for a long time, holding the keys in her lap. Then, quietly, she whispered to herself, "I asked." The apartment was quiet when she got home. One light glowed in the kitchen, left on as always. Lila stepped inside, kicked off her shoes, and locked the door behind her. Eli was still awake. He never slept before midnight. His wheelchair sat parked near the window, his tablet screen casting a faint blue glow onto his face. He looked up when she entered and raised an eyebrow. "Hey," he said, "how many meatloafs did you serve tonight?" She chuckled softly, dropping her keys into the chipped bowl on the counter. "Only 4. A record low. Progress." She moved past him and headed toward the fridge, pulled out a pitcher of water and poured 2 glasses, one for him, one for herself. She set his on the tray attached to his chair. He tilted his head. "You okay?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just long day." He didn't push. He never did. They sat in silence, sipping water. The desert air outside pressed gently against the windows, making the glass hum faintly. Then she said it. "I asked someone for $50 tonight." Eli blinked. "You?" "Yeah." He smiled gently. "What'd they say?" She paused. "They gave me 100. "Nice. What was the catch?" "There wasn't one." Eli turned his chair slightly to face her. "And how do you feel?" Lila looked down at her glass. Like it didn't break me. He nodded slowly. Then it was worth it. She didn't tell him who it was. Didn't mention the diner booth, the calm eyes, the way the man hadn't flinched when she asked. But her heart held the weight of it, not because of the money, because he asked why. And when she answered, he didn't argue, didn't minimize, didn't turn it into a performance. He'd just heard her. That was what she hadn't expected. Not the money, but the listening. Later, when Eli had gone to bed and the apartment was still again, Layla pulled the crumpled napkin from her apron and set it on the table beside her. "You made me smile," it read. She whispered the words out loud, just once, then reached for a pen, and beneath the boy's handwriting, she added her own. "Tonight, I made myself proud." The kitchen light flickered once, then steadied. And in that moment, with nothing but silence around her, Lila Monroe felt something crack open. Not her pride, her future. The night air was cooler now, the last warmth of the sun gone beneath the horizon. Keanu stepped into the parking lot, helmet in hand, the crunch of his boots against gravel the only sound for a few seconds. The street light overhead flickered once, then steadied, casting a pale glow across the worn concrete. He reached his bike and paused. One hand gripped the handlebar. The other held his helmet loosely at his side. But he didn't move. He stood there, staring ahead at nothing in particular, that question echoing again in his mind. "Would you be willing to tip me $50? There had been no shame in it, no collapse. Just a question offered like a stone across still water, measured, soft, but heavy enough to reach the other side. Keanu wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about the way she held her voice together when she said it, the breath she took before she spoke, the way she didn't explain herself until he asked. He had been asked for everything before: attention, time, roles, approval, but rarely had someone asked him for something so small and made it feel so weighty. He set the helmet on the seat, then turned back toward the diner. Inside, Lila had just finished wiping down the counter when she heard the bell chime. It was nearly closing time. Only 2 patrons remained, Joe's regular at the bar and a college student writing in a spiral notebook near the window. She looked up, surprised to see the man in the black jacket walk back through the door. He didn't have the look of someone who forgot something. His hands were empty, no keys, no bag, just calm eyes, taking in the room like it hadn't changed, even though something inside him had. He approached slowly. Lila stepped out from behind the counter. "Did you leave something?" she asked gently. "No," he said, "just one question." She waited. "What's your name?" She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. "Lila," she said. "Lila Monroe." Keanu nodded once. "You said your brother, the medication, he's sick?" A breath caught in her chest. She gave the smallest nod. "He's paralyzed since he was 6. Keanu's voice dropped. "You're all he's got?" Another nod. He looked at her a long moment, something settling in his chest like dust in quiet light. "I'd like to hear more," he said. She didn't respond right away. "Not tonight," he added, "but soon." Then, without waiting for a thank you or reaction, he turned and walked out the way he came. Lila stood still, hands brushing against the edge of the counter, as if grounding herself. She watched him disappear through the door again, the same soft chime ringing out behind him. This time, she didn't look away. Something had shifted. It wasn't the words. It was the space he left behind. She'd spent years working double shifts, getting used to the way most people either looked right past her or stared too long, but never truly saw her. What she'd experienced with him wasn't recognition of her face. It was something else. It was acknowledgement. Joe approached again, holding a dish towel in one hand. "Same guy?" she asked casually. Lila gave a small nod, still facing the door. Joe wiped down a stool beside her. "He come back for pie?" "No," Lila said quietly. "He asked my name." Joe raised an eyebrow. "That all?" Lila hesitated, then added, "He asked about Eli." Joe didn't press. She just gave a soft and went back to work. Lila's fingers moved slowly to the napkin still tucked in her apron pocket. She ran her thumb along the folded edge. She couldn't explain what just happened, not really, but she felt something that had been locked away for a long time flicker again. Possibility. Outside, Keanu sat back on his motorcycle. He didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he leaned forward, arms draped over the handlebars, and watched the reflection of the neon sign in his side mirror. Charlie's Diner, open 24 hours. But it wasn't the name he was thinking about. It was hers. Lila Monroe, a name that stayed with him longer than most. He thought about how many times he'd seen the same roles played over and over in his life. Fame, flattery, performance. But this was different. She hadn't asked for attention. She hadn't even tried to impress him. And when he left money, she didn't smile like she'd won something. She just folded the moment quietly and moved on. There was power in that kind of silence, and dignity in that kind of ask. He pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app, and typed 3 words. Lila, Albuquerque, brother. Then he put the phone away, started the engine, and eased onto the highway. He didn't know when he'd return, but the road ahead somehow felt shorter now. Because sometimes a single question doesn't end a conversation. It begins a story. The next morning, Lila awoke before the sun. She lay in bed for a few minutes longer than usual, staring at the ceiling. The apartment was still quiet. The only sound, the slow, familiar whir of Eli's medical equipment in the next room. She knew every beep, every breath pattern. It had become part of her body's rhythm. But today, something about her own breath felt different, less mechanical, less heavy. She sat up, stretched, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The folded napkin was still there on the counter. Next to it, her tips from last night, untouched. She hadn't counted them yet. She hadn't needed to. She picked up the napkin and read the boy's scrawl again. You made me smile. For some reason, that hit harder than the $100 bill. In the next room, Eli stirred. You're up early, he called. She smiled. So are you. He wheeled out moments later, rubbing sleep from his eyes with the back of his hand. I had a dream, he said. You were talking on stage in front of a bunch of people. Lila chuckled. Was I crying? He grinned. No, but I think they were. She poured 2 glasses of juice and handed him one. What kind of stage? She asked. Big, he said. Like one with curtains and a spotlight, but it wasn't for acting. You were telling your story and people were really listening. She paused, holding her glass just below her chin. Think that's ever gonna happen? She asked, half joking. Eli looked at her without blinking. It already did. She stared at him. You just didn't know he was listening, he added. Her heart caught for a beat. You saw him? I saw someone different walk in. I always notice. He looked like someone who didn't expect to stay but stayed anyway. She nodded slowly, and in that moment, she realized something. She hadn't just asked for help that night. She had broken through something. A silence so long it had nearly become her identity. And now, someone else was carrying that silence with them too. She didn't know what would come next. But she did know this. Someone had seen her. Not for her weariness. Not for her service. But for her strength. And that changed everything. She looked at Eli again and said, I think this story's not done. He nodded. Then you better start writing it. By the time Lila parked in front of the apartment, the street was nearly empty. A single porch light flickered 2 buildings down. The only sounds were the distant buzz of power lines and the low murmur of someone's television echoing faintly through a cracked window. She shut off the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the heaviness of the day caught up with her all at once. Inside, the apartment was dim but peaceful. Eli was awake, as expected. His wheelchair was parked just beside the hallway, and his head was tilted back, eyes closed, earbuds in. He opened one eye as she entered. "You're late," he said, yawning. Lila set her bag down and kicked off her shoes. "Had a strange night," she replied. Eli grinned. "Did a celebrity show up or something?" She glanced at him, eyebrows raised. "Actually," he sat up straighter. "Wait, really?" She headed into the small kitchen, opening a can of soup and pouring it into a pot. "Yep." Walked in, sat down, ordered dinner like he'd been there 100 times before. Eli wheeled himself into the doorway. "Who was it?" Lila stirred the soup. "Keanu Reeves." Eli's mouth dropped open. "No way, you're lying." She smiled. "I'm not. Did you ask for his autograph?" "No," she said, without turning around. "Just $50. The room went quiet. Even the soft bubbling of the soup couldn't fill the space left by those words. Eli blinked. "You did what?" She looked over her shoulder. "I asked him for a $50 tip." "Lila." She ladled the soup into 2 bowls, placed them on the table, and sat down. "I didn't beg. I didn't explain, I just asked." Eli wheeled up beside her, still staring. "Why?" "Because the pharmacy wouldn't fill your meds without full payment. And because I'm tired of pretending I can handle everything without help." He opened his mouth to speak, but then stopped. She slid his bowl closer. "He gave me 100. Eli reached for the spoon, but paused again. Was he weird about it? No. He just listened. That was the weird part. They ate in silence for a while, both lost in thought. The soup was simple, chicken noodle, but it warmed them like something sacred. When they finished, Lila stood to clean up. Her movements were slower now, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of what had been said and what hadn't. Eli rolled beside her at the sink, his voice quieter now. "Do you think he knew who you were, like your story?" "No," Lila said, rinsing the bowls. "He didn't ask, and I didn't offer." Eli nodded. "Still, he came back in." She paused, one hand in the soapy water. "Yeah, that part. I don't know what that was." Eli leaned on the counter with one elbow. "Maybe it wasn't about the money." Lila shook her head slowly. "It never was. Not for me." She dried the bowls and set them aside. They moved to the small living room, where the couch sagged in the middle and the walls held old photos of their mother, long gone now. A quilt their grandmother had sewn hung over the backrest, its corners worn but still warm. Lila helped Eli onto the couch beside her. He leaned into her shoulder like he used to when they were younger. "You think he'll come back?" he asked. She hesitated. "No idea." Eli pulled the blanket up over his lap. "But it mattered, didn't it?" She smiled softly. "Yeah, it mattered." The apartment was filled with quiet again, but it no longer felt heavy. Just still, like a stage waiting for its next scene. She looked at her phone for the first time that night. No messages, no missed calls, no strange emails or alerts. Whatever that moment had been, it was gone now, tucked away into the folds of the ordinary. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. It was late. "All right," she said, gently nudging Eli. "Time for bed." He didn't argue. She wheeled him to his room, helped him transfer to the bed, and adjusted his blanket. He smiled up at her, already half asleep. "Hey," he whispered as she turned off the light. "Yeah, I'm proud of you." She paused in the doorway, caught off guard. "For asking," he added. Her throat tightened. She gave him a small nod, then slipped out before he could see her eyes fill. In her own room, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the worn carpet. She hadn't expected him to give. She hadn't expected herself to ask. And yet here she was, feeling more seen from one question then from years of silent endurance. Maybe nothing would come of it, but maybe something already had. Lila changed into her worn sleep shirt, the one with the faded print of a high school volunteer day from years ago. She stood at her bedroom window for a few moments, looking out at the stillness of the night. The parking lot below was quiet, bathed in orange streetlight. A lone cat darted across the sidewalk. The world outside looked the same. But she didn't feel the same. She pulled out her old journal from the drawer beside her bed. It had been months, maybe a year, since she'd written anything. The first few pages were filled with goals, study notes, plans for certification, lists of scholarships she never applied for. The last page was dated the night Eli had his surgery. After that, everything else had stopped. She opened to a blank page and stared at it. Then she wrote, he asked. He paused, then added, and he listened. Beneath that, she let her pen rest, not out of doubt, but because she didn't want to fill it with anything less true. The world didn't change tonight, but something in her had, not because of the money, not even because of the man, but because she had spoken out loud a need that had lived quietly in her for years, and had survived the asking. She slipped the journal back into the drawer and turned off the light. In the dark, she laid down with a kind of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Not resolution, but release. Her phone remained silent beside her pillow. She didn't check it again. And as her eyes closed, her last thought before sleep was simple. Maybe that moment was enough, but deep down, where the future waits quietly for permission to begin again, she hoped it wasn't the end. Back in Los Angeles, the skies above Sunset Boulevard glowed with their usual haze. The city moved fast as ever, full of noise, headlines, and schedules. But inside Keanu's modest home, tucked away in a quiet canyon road, the world slowed down. He sat in his office, the same room he often used for quiet reading and personal reflection, surrounded by books and handwritten notes. The window was cracked open, letting in the faint hum of wind and birdsong. His motorcycle helmet sat on a shelf beside a dusty photo of his younger self, smiling with someone the world no longer remembered. Keanu opened his laptop and typed in the name of the diner, Charlie's, Albuquerque. Popped up in seconds, no flashy website. Just a grainy Yelp listing, 3.5 stars, with reviews mostly about the pancakes and the early morning coffee. He scrolled quickly, skipping past pictures of booths and plates. He typed again, Lila Monroe. It wasn't easy. There were hundreds of Lila Monroes across the country. But after cross-referencing the address of the diner, a local address, and a public high school alumni site, he found her. No Instagram, no Facebook. But there was a LinkedIn profile, bare bones and out of date. It listed Waitress, Charlie's Diner, 2017 present. No other jobs, no college listed. Just one line in the summary, always learning, hoping to help kids feel seen. That's what stopped him. He clicked again, digging deeper through archived local news clippings and public records. He found a scholarship mention from 10 years ago. Lila Monroe, awarded partial tuition for a child psychology degree at the University of New Mexico. Then a quiet note in a local paper. Local teen defers college to care for injured sibling after car accident. He kept reading. The Medical Assistance Fund in 2014, linked to a pediatric neurology clinic. Her name was listed as guardian. The child's name, Eli Monroe. One hospital form had been scanned online as part of a state transparency report. Under primary contact, Lila's name was typed, with a note from a case manager beside it. Handles all care alone, no secondary guardian. Impressive advocate. Finally, a redacted version of a school district report, notes from a social workers meeting, likely made public by an education nonprofit. Her name appeared only once in a summary. High promise. Excellent communication skills. Wanted to become a school counselor. Withdrew after family trauma. File closed. Keanu leaned back in his chair, letting the words settle. No drama, no handouts, no spotlight. Just a long, straight road of quiet sacrifice. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like something else. It felt like mission. Keanu closed his laptop gently and sat for a long moment with his hands folded. There was something about the paper trail Lila left behind. Thin, barely visible, but steady. It reminded him of the kind of people the world rarely stops to notice. People who don't break under the weight of life, but bend quietly, again and again, until they're holding up everything around them. He reached for his phone and tapped a single number on speed dial. "Hi," he said when it connected. "Can I speak to Dara?" A second passed. Then, "Hey Keanu, what's going on?" Dara was one of his most trusted assistants, sharp, compassionate, and experienced with delicate inquiries. She'd helped manage dozens of outreach efforts through his foundation. More than anyone, she understood the difference between a story for press and a life worth investing in quietly. "I need a favor," he said. "Albuquerque. A woman named Lila Monroe works at a diner. Has a brother named Eli. No public campaigns, no attention-seeking, just doing the work." There was a short pause. "What kind of favor?" Dara asked carefully. "I want someone local. Not loud. Someone who can listen and build something around her without putting her on a stage. Someone who can make things grow where she already planted them." And the goal? She wanted to help kids. Then life got in the way. "I think we can help her find her way back." Dara was silent for a second, then replied, "All right. I'll put some feelers out, quiet ones. What are you thinking? Education? Counseling?" Keanu looked down at his notebook, where he'd written the words, Lila, Albuquerque, brother. "I'm thinking something that doesn't have a name yet," he said. "But it will." She smiled on the other end of the line. "Okay, I'll build a soft profile and vet a few people. And the foundation? Start prepping a soft fund. Not a full grant yet, but get the wheels turning." "Got it." Keanu hung up, then stood and walked to the small bookshelf across the room. He pulled down an old folder, one filled with past letters and thank you notes from people his foundation had helped anonymously. None of them ever made it into the news, but they were the ones that mattered most. He found an old one from a counselor in Detroit who'd started a program for children of incarcerated parents. It read, "All I needed was someone to believe my idea wasn't crazy. You were that someone." He stared at the words for a while. Then, almost without thinking, he whispered out loud, /6. "Just needs one person to believe it's not too late." The next morning, Dara sent a message confirming her contacts had found someone. A woman named Brenna Voss, former trauma social worker, now operating a grassroots care initiative in Albuquerque. She ran a small non-profit that supported family caregivers, especially siblings like Lila, who fell through the cracks of the system. Keanu reviewed the file quietly. Brenna had no flashy website, just a short mission statement: "We help those who help others." That was enough. He texted Dora, "Perfect. Let's arrange a meeting. But don't mention my name. Let it come from the work, not the headline." Then he pulled out an old notebook. It was the one he carried when he traveled, not for autographs or scripts, but for ideas. He turned to a blank page and wrote a single phrase across the top. "Not everyone needs saving. Some just need a witness." Below it, he began sketching ideas. Not buildings, not organizations, not clinics with long waiting lists, but places that felt like home. A room with colors that didn't scream sterile. Programs that asked questions instead of assuming answers. People who knew how to say, "I see you." He thought of Lila's face as she asked for help. Not desperate, just honest. He thought of the way she carried herself, measured, protective of her dignity, never trying to earn pity. And he thought of Eli, though he hadn't met him, imagining the quiet bond that must have shaped everything she did. By evening, the foundation had drafted a soft budget proposal. Quiet startup funds for an unnamed center, enough to begin conversations with local therapists, educators, and mental health professionals. All of it designed to center around one thing: caregiver-led support for children impacted by disability and trauma. Keanu added one line to the proposal before signing off. Let her lead. No blueprint, no demands. Just trust. Later that night, as city lights blinked through his window, Keanu sat with a cup of tea and opened the folder again. He found a note tucked inside from years ago. It wasn't addressed to him, but to an old friend, now gone. The line at the bottom struck him. The world doesn't need louder voices. It needs deeper listening. He looked at the wall, where a single framed photo of a mountain pass hung above his desk. The road curved endlessly forward. Empty. Quiet. Just like the one that led him to that diner. He whispered to the still room. He thought that moment ended at the tip jar, but it didn't. Then he smiled softly to himself. It was just the start. The building stood at the edge of a forgotten street, its bricks sun-faded, its windows clouded by time and weather. The old community center hadn't seen life in years. Its front sign was missing letters, and the double doors creaked when opened, like they were waking from a long sleep. Lila stood just inside the entrance, her arms crossed lightly as she took it all in. The air smelled of dust and wood polish. Light filtered in through cracked panes, casting long golden streaks across the scuffed floor. Beside her, Brenna Voss walked quietly, letting Lila absorb the space. They hadn't spoken much on the drive over. Brenna had simply said, "I want to show you something." And now, here they were, alone in a building full of ghosts and possibilities. The hall was empty, but Lila could still hear the echo of children's footsteps, imagined laughter bouncing off the walls. There was a playroom near the back, faded murals of stars and animals peeling at the edges. She walked into it slowly, brushing her fingers against the paint. "It's been closed since the last director retired," Brenna said from the doorway. "No one stepped in to keep it going. Not because no one cared, just no one had time or space." Lila turned, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like it's waiting for something." Brenna smiled. "Maybe it's waiting for someone." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Brenna added, "We could get it cleaned up. The structure's sound. The plumbing's a little grumpy, but the bones are good. Some of the funding's already secured. What we need is a center, a vision, a leader." Lila furrowed her brow. "A leader?" Brennan nodded. "Someone who understands what it means to care for others. Someone who knows what trauma looks like when it isn't loud. Someone who's already been doing the work, just without the building or the title." Lila turned back toward the mural. A faded handprint near the bottom caught her eye. It must have belonged to a child no older than 5. "I'm not a professional," she said softly. "You are," Brenna replied. "You just haven't been paid for it yet." Lila let out a short, breathy laugh. "I'm serious," Brenna continued. "This place could become yours, if you're willing to lead." Lila didn't speak. She simply walked further into the room and looked up at the blank space on the far wall. "What would I call it?" she whispered. Brenna smiled behind her. "That's not for us to name." Lila stood in the center of the old playroom, her fingertips brushing a plastic chair flipped on its side. It squeaked slightly beneath her touch. In her mind, a younger version of herself appeared. 19, bright-eyed, wearing a blue volunteer badge and a ponytail that always came undone by lunch. She remembered the sounds: kids shouting, crayons scraping, counselors calling names for snack time, the smell of peanut butter sandwiches and lemon-scented disinfectant. She remembered how good it had felt to walk into a place where her whole purpose was to help someone else feel safe. Back then, she had dreams, a degree in child psychology, a career helping children through grief and transition. She used to stay after her volunteer shifts just to talk with the younger kids who didn't want to go home yet. She remembered one boy, Marco, who never spoke but always handed her a toy before he left. The day he hugged her goodbye without warning, she cried in the stairwell for 10 minutes. She hadn't thought about Marco in years. And now she could feel that version of herself stirring again, like a light turning back on in a room that had sat dark far too long. Behind her, Brenna walked slowly down the hall. "Do you want to sit for a while?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "No, I want to keep walking." They moved from room to room, each one layered in dust and silence. There was an old reading room filled with stacked chairs, a small kitchen in the back with faded notes still pinned to a corkboard, one that read, "Remember to label juice boxes." Lila opened a closet and found a bin labeled Art Therapy. Inside were broken crayons, stickers, and a dozen handmade cards with the word "Thank you" scrawled across the front. One had a rainbow drawn in trembling lines and a name signed in large letters, "To Miss Lila." She stared at it. Her breath caught. Brenna looked over her shoulder. "You were here." Lila nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They walked outside to the back lot, where an empty garden bed sat overrun with weeds. Lila knelt and ran her hand over the soil. It was dry, cracked, but not dead. Brenna crouched beside her. "We could plant something here, or let the kids do it," Lila said. "What if I'm not ready?" Brenna smiled. "Then we wait. But I don't think you're asking that because you're scared. I think you're asking because part of you already said yes." Lila looked up at the building, and for the first time in years, her mind didn't jump to what had been lost. It drifted toward what might be restored. Section 7. The Dream Resurfaces. Lila visits a closed community center in a worn neighborhood. It's dusty, unused. But she sees something in it. Potential. Brenna tells her, "This place could become yours, if you're willing to lead." Flashbacks show Lila at 19, volunteering with traumatized children, laughing, full of hope. Before the accident changed everything. For the first time in years, she asks, "What would I call it?" Brenna replies, "That's not for us to name." Lila stood in the center of the old playroom, her fingertips brushing a plastic chair flipped on its side. It squeaked slightly beneath her touch. In her mind, a younger version of herself appeared. 19, bright-eyed, wearing a blue volunteer badge and a ponytail that always came undone by lunch. She remembered the sounds: kids shouting, crayons scraping, counselors calling names for snack time, the smell of peanut butter sandwiches and lemon-scented disinfectant. She remembered how good it had felt to walk into a place where her whole purpose was to help someone else feel safe. Back then, she had dreams, a degree in child psychology, a career helping children through grief and transition. She used to stay after her volunteer shifts just to talk with the younger kids who didn't want to go home yet. She remembered one boy, Marco, who never spoke but always handed her a toy before he left. The day he hugged her goodbye without warning, she cried in the stairwell for 10 minutes. She hadn't thought about Marco in years, and now she could feel that version of herself stirring again, like a light turning back on in a room that had sat dark far too long. Behind her, Brenna walked slowly down the hall. "Do you want to sit for a while?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "No, I want to keep walking." They moved from room to room, each one layered in dust and silence. There was an old reading room filled with stacked chairs, a small kitchen in the back with faded notes still pinned to a corkboard, one that read, "Remember to label juice boxes." Lila opened a closet and found a bin labeled Art Therapy. Inside were broken crayons, stickers, and a dozen handmade cards with the word "Thank you" scrawled across the front. One had a rainbow drawn in trembling lines and a name signed in large letters, "To Miss Lila." She stared at it, her breath caught. Brenna looked over her shoulder. "You were here?" Lila nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They walked outside to the back lot, where an empty garden bed sat overrun with weeds. Lila knelt and ran her hand over the soil. It was dry, cracked, but not dead. Brenna crouched beside her. "We could plant something here, or let the kids do it." Lila said, "What if I'm not ready?" Brenna smiled. "Then we wait. But I don't think you're asking that because you're scared. I think you're asking because part of you already said yes." Lila looked up at the building, and for the first time in years, her mind didn't jump to what had been lost. It drifted toward what might be restored. Later that night, Lila sat on the edge of her bed with the old rainbow card in her lap. The sun had long since set, casting the room in gentle shadow, save for the lamp flickering beside her. Eli was asleep in the next room, his soft breathing steady through the cracked door. She traced the name on the card again. "To Miss Lila." Her fingers shook slightly, but not from sadness, from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Readiness. On the table beside her, she had begun a small list. Just a few ideas. Names of people she'd met during her old volunteer days. Types of programs she used to admire. Words like safe, dignity, healing, and color. She didn't know what to call the center yet, but she knew what it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be sterile. It wouldn't be bureaucratic. It wouldn't make people fill out endless forms just to be seen. It would be something that said, "You matter, right now, as you are." She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet street below. The city didn't know yet. The world hadn't seen it. But a door had opened again inside her. And this time, she wasn't going to walk past it. She pulled out her old journal, flipped to a blank page, and wrote a single question across the top. What if it works? Then beneath it a second line. What if I lead? Down the hall, Eli stirred and called softly, "Lila?" She stepped to his doorway and whispered, "Yeah? You okay?" She smiled. "I think so." There was a pause. Then, "Was it a good place?" She nodded. "Yeah, it really was." And when she turned back toward her room, she carried something with her that hadn't been there the night before. Not certainty, but conviction. Because for the first time in a decade, her dream hadn't vanished. It had resurfaced. Eli found her still sitting at the table 10 minutes later, staring out the window, phone resting screen down beside her glass of water. "You okay?" he asked, wheeling himself closer. She turned to him slowly, her expression dazed, but not confused. More like someone who had just been handed an envelope they never expected to arrive. "I got a call," she said. Eli raised an eyebrow. "From who?" "A woman, named Dara. From some nonprofit group, I think. She said someone gave her my name." Eli watched her face carefully. "What kind of call was it?" Lila exhaled, unsure how to summarize something that felt too big for simple sentences. "They want to talk. About starting something here. Something for kids. And they want me to help shape it." Eli's eyes lit up. "They want you to work there?" "No," she said quietly. "They want me to build it." That silenced him. Then he broke into a grin. "Lila, that's huge." She smiled softly. "It doesn't feel real." "Maybe it is," he said. "And maybe it's about time." She laughed, more from disbelief than joy. "I don't even know what to say to them. I'm not licensed. I've never run anything." "You ran me," Eli said with a smirk. "That counts." She rolled her eyes, but her smile deepened. "This is big, Eli. I'm scared." "I know," he said. "But that's how you know it matters." She stood and walked toward the window again. Outside, the street was still. just the soft sound of a lawn sprinkler 2 doors down. "I think it started the night I asked that question," she said. "At the diner. I thought it ended there, but maybe it echoed." Eli finished. She looked at him, surprised, then nodded. Later that night, after Eli was asleep, she opened her journal again and stared at the blank page. She thought about the name she'd one day give the place, the rooms she'd paint, the shelves she'd fill with sensory toys and weighted blankets and soft chairs that didn't squeak when kids shifted in them. She imagined herself standing at the front door, not behind a desk, but beside it, eye level with the people walking in, the ones who would arrive carrying invisible loads, like she had for so many years. She wrote one sentence across the page. "This time, I'll be the one listening." And then beneath it, "Because someone once did that for me." The next morning, Lila stood in front of her mirror longer than usual, not because she was trying to look different, but because, for once, she felt different. Her reflection held the same worn sweatshirt, the same tired eyes, but behind them was something she hadn't seen in years: purpose. She pulled her hair back into a simple bun and went into the kitchen, where Eli was already awake and scrolling through his tablet. He looked up. "You're early," he said. She poured coffee and smiled. "I've got a call with Dara in 20 minutes. He nodded with pride. "You gonna tell her everything?" "I'm gonna try." She sat at the table and opened her notebook. She'd scribbled a few thoughts, nothing polished, just truths. That trauma doesn't always scream. That healing starts when someone feels safe. That the people who give the most often ask the least. When the video call connected, Dara greeted her warmly. "Morning, Lila." "Morning." Dara smiled. "Before we begin, I want to share something. The man who mentioned you, he didn't give us directions. He just said this: if she speaks, listen. So that's what we'll do." Lila blinked back, the sting in her eyes. She didn't know if Keanu would ever reach out again. She didn't expect him to. But she would carry those words with her, because someone had seen her strength when she herself had started to forget it. An hour later, she ended the call with pages of ideas, outlines, names of potential partners, and something deeper. The door she had once thought was locked forever was now wide open. Later that week, she stood in the empty community center again. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the dust in the air like tiny stars. She walked to the same wall in the playroom where the paint had peeled. The same handprints were still there. She reached up and placed her own palm beside the smallest one. She whispered, "We're coming back." Then she turned, pulled out her phone, and took a photo of the room. No filters, no caption, just the beginning. And in her journal that night, she wrote the sentence that would one day be etched on the wall above the front door. This place was built by a question, and by someone brave enough to answer it. Lila didn't know how to bring it up. The days following the call with Dara moved like honey, slow, thick with emotion, and sweetened with possibilities. But still, she hadn't told Eli. Not the full story. Not the part where a center might actually be built. Or that someone was trusting her to lead. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was fear of jinxing it. Maybe she needed time to believe it herself before saying it aloud. That morning, as she poured oatmeal into 2 chipped bowls, Eli rolled in from his room, yawning. "You were smiling in your sleep last night," he said, stretching his arms with a teasing smirk. She turned, blinking. "I was?" Big smile, like someone who won the lottery smile. Lila chuckled nervously and stirred the pot. "I figured it was either a dream about cinnamon rolls or something else." She placed his bowl on the table and sat beside him. It was something else. He waited. She took a breath. "Remember the call I got the other day? It wasn't just about asking me questions. They want me to help design something. For real. A center for kids and caregivers, trauma-informed, community-based. And they want me to lead it." Eli's spoon paused mid-air. Lila braced herself. Then, slowly, He lowered it and stared at her. "You?" She nodded. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice broke the silence with something simple but sharp. "It's about time." She looked up, startled. Eli leaned forward. "You were never just my sister. You were everyone's safe place, even when you were 19 and couldn't drive yet. You made scared kids laugh. You sat with other people's pain like it was your job, and then you made it your job." Lila's throat tightened. "You didn't stop being that person," Eli added. "You just ran out of space to be her." She tried to respond, but her voice cracked. So he kept going. "You made this life work for both of us. You gave up dreams so I could keep breathing. And now someone sees that, and they're handing it back to you. Don't say no." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She covered her face with both hands, shaking slightly. Not from grief, but from finally being seen in full. Eli rolled closer, placing his hand gently on hers. "You already saved me, Lila. Now go build the place that saves someone else." She lowered her hand slowly and nodded, tears streaking down her smile. That night, long after Eli had gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a blank sheet of paper. At the top, in gentle script, she wrote the name, Lila's Place, and beneath it a simple line, "A bridge for the broken." The next morning, Lila left her sketch on the table. When Eli wheeled out for breakfast and saw the paper waiting by his cereal, he didn't say anything right away. He picked it up gently, studied the lettering, and traced the line beneath it with one finger. "A bridge for the broken," he read aloud. Lila watched from the kitchen, her coffee untouched. "Too dramatic?" Eli shook his head. "No, it's right." He looked at her. "Because it's not about fixing people. It's about meeting them where they already are." She exhaled. "That's what I want it to be." They ate together quietly, the paper sitting between them like a promise. Later, Lila folded the sketch into her notebook and headed to the community center. The air outside was cool for once, the wind brushing her arms like a whisper of encouragement. She walked through the back door this time, stepping directly into the old garden plot. There, Brenna was waiting. Lila held up the notebook and passed it to her. Brenna read the name and smiled wide. "It's beautiful." Lila stepped closer to the plot of soil. "I want the first thing we do here to be something real, something you can touch." She knelt and dug her hands into the earth. Brenna followed, grabbing a nearby spade. They worked side by side for over an hour, pulling weeds, turning the soil, and laughing when the hose accidentally sprayed Brenna's shoes. By the time they stood back up, the bed was clear. Lila brushed her hands off and pointed. "We'll start with flowers, nothing fancy, just color, something the kids can help care for." Brenna nodded. "And after that?" Lila looked up at the building. "Then we start painting, cleaning, making space. And the name?" Lila smiled. "We already have that." They walked through the hall together, the sunlight casting long shadows over the cracked tiles. In one of the smaller rooms, Lila paused. "I want this one to be a quiet room. Pillows, low lighting, no questions, just space to breathe." Brenna pulled out her notepad and jotted it down. "Anything else?" Lila closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "I want the kids who walk through this door to feel what I never did when I needed help." Brenna looked at her. "And what's that?" Lila smiled through the tears forming in her eyes. "Like they belong, even when they're breaking." That evening, Lila returned home with soil under her fingernails and paint swatches tucked into her backpack. Eli was watching a documentary with the volume low. As she walked in, he paused it and turned toward her. "You look tired," he said. "Good tired." She dropped the backpack and collapsed into the armchair. "I am." He nodded, then motioned toward the table. "I framed it." She followed his gaze and saw her sketch, Lila's Place. A bridge for the broken. Now, in a simple wooden frame, leaning against the salt shaker. Her breath caught. "You framed it?" "Found the old one from Mom's last photo," Eli said with a shrug. Felt like it belonged to something. She crossed the room and picked it up carefully. "It's going on the wall," she said. "Where everyone can see it," he replied. They sat quietly for a few moments. Then Eli asked, "Do you feel different?" Lila thought for a moment, then replied, "I feel like something just started. Like a piece of me I buried stood back up." Eli smiled. "Good, then maybe I can be your first referral." She looked at him. "I'll help the kids build the garden," he added. "You do the talking. I'll do the dirt." Lila laughed. "Deal." Later that night, after Eli had gone to bed, she stood in front of the fridge with a magnet in her hand. She took down an old medical reminder and replaced it with her framed logo sketch. And she whispered, "It's real now." The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence as she backed away and looked at the paper one more time. It wasn't just a name. It wasn't just a promise. It was a return to the girl who once believed she could help people, to the woman who now knew she already had. Lila turned out the light and walked toward her room, but something about the framed sketch stayed glowing in the dark. Faintly, soft, as if it were already becoming something more. The morning was still, the kind that made a city feel smaller. Keanu stood across the street from the community center, dressed in jeans, a faded cap pulled low over his forehead. His motorcycle sat parked a few blocks away, angled beneath a jacaranda tree, engine cooling. He didn't need to be seen. That wasn't why he came. Across the road, the building looked different now. The old peeling sign was gone. Fresh coats of paint brightened the front wall. New flower beds flanked the walkway, full of marigolds and lavender. A hand-painted wooden board leaned beside the door with cheerful block letters. Lila's place. A bridge for the broken. Keanu remained still. Through the windows, he saw motion. Staff members moved about with purpose, laughing softly as they carried boxes and rearranged chairs. He spotted Eli wheeling down the hallway, clipboard in hand, directing a few younger volunteers who seemed to be hanging art. Then, Lila appeared. She stepped outside, holding a roll of tape and a folder. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a gray shirt with the center's logo printed above her heart. She smiled at a child trailing behind her, maybe 9 years old, holding a sketch pad, and leaned down to listen to something he whispered. Keanu couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He could see everything he came to know in that one gesture. The stillness, the attentiveness, the way she stayed present. She stood, laughing now, as the boy pointed to something absurd and guided him gently back inside. For a moment longer, Keanu just watched. He hadn't planned to stay long. He didn't bring anyone with him. No press, no foundation reps, no camera crew, just himself. Because this wasn't about legacy. It was about honor. Behind the scenes, the gears had already turned. His foundation had quietly locked in funding. 5 years of operations secured through an anonymous grant. Lila wouldn't know where it came from, not officially, but it would be there when she needed it. Not just for rent or supplies, but for the long-haul sustainability most grassroots efforts never get. The foundation had also arranged full scholarships for Lila to complete her trauma-informed counseling credentials. Fully remote, flexible, and accessible without debt. An email had already been sent to her, signed only, "A friend of the bridge." And beyond that, a larger plan was in motion. One that would model Lila's place as a trauma-informed pilot site for future community centers across underserved regions. If it worked here, quietly and with dignity, it could work anywhere. Keanu took one last look, nodded to himself, and turned to leave. Some things didn't need applause. They just needed to happen. Keanu walked 3 blocks before stopping at a small cafe tucked into the corner of an old strip mall. He ordered a black coffee and took a seat near the window facing the road. The barista didn't recognize him, or if she did, she gave no sign. He appreciated that. He pulled out a notebook from his jacket. Thin, weathered, the kind he only used for personal notes, and opened it to a blank page. At the top, he wrote, "When something grows without asking for sunlight, you give it everything you've got." He sat back and let that settle. Lila hadn't once asked for recognition. Not when she told her story, not when she started rebuilding, not even now, when a new wave of families had begun to walk through her doors every week. She wasn't building something to be seen. She was building something so others could finally feel seen. He remembered what Dara had said during the early planning stages. This isn't a donation, it's an invitation for her to reclaim her future on her terms. And that's exactly what it had become. Inside the center, Brenna had begun organizing a community advisory group to help sustain operations. Lila insisted that it include not only professionals but caregivers, teens, and even a few former clients who had aged out of other programs. If it's going to serve them, she said, they need to help shape it. Keanu smiled as he recalled that line. Meanwhile, Eli had created a small garden committee. 3 kids under 10 and 2 high schoolers helped him plan a wheelchair-accessible gardening layout. One of them brought his grandfather's shovel every Thursday, just to be part of it. That's the part no spreadsheet could capture. The parts that mattered. The foundation had also assigned 2 infrastructure specialists to consult with Lila remotely. Their job was to help her build without burying her in red tape. One of them sent back a progress report titled, "The Center That Teaches Before It Opens Its Doors." Keanu sipped his coffee and closed the notebook. He wouldn't stay in Albuquerque tonight. The road was calling again, and he had miles left before home. But he left the cafe with something deeper than satisfaction. He left with peace. Lila didn't know he had been there. She didn't need to. Some gifts aren't meant to be unwrapped in front of a crowd. Some are made to be opened slowly, in private, over time. He got on his bike, started the engine, and rode into the rising wind. Behind him, a bridge had begun to rise. And he knew it would hold. The following week, an envelope arrived at Lila's apartment. No return address, just her name, neatly typed, and a wax seal in the shape of a small bridge. She opened it slowly, curiosity tinged with hesitation. Inside was a short letter, printed on cream-colored stationery. "Dear Lila, sometimes the best foundations are laid by people who never get credit. This is just to say, we saw what you built before there were walls, and we believe in what you'll do next. Included is a full scholarship to complete your certification. No essays, no prerequisites, just trust. Take the steps when you're ready. Behind the scenes, support is in place. No strings, no spotlight. Just help. For the long haul. A friend of the bridge." Her fingers trembled as she held the letter. She turned it over. Nothing more. No logo, no signature. A symbol, small, deliberate. A bridge. She folded the paper and sat down at the table, heart pounding with quiet disbelief. The past few months had felt like a dream slowly waking up. But this was confirmation that someone out there believed the dream mattered enough to nurture it. She looked over at Eli, who was drawing garden plans again on his tablet. He noticed her face. "Another letter?" he asked. She nodded. He smiled. "Good kind?" She nodded again, more slowly this time. "The kind that changes everything." Over the next few days, the center hummed with energy. The kids painted their own tiles to line the walkway. Volunteers organized a coat drive. A local therapist offered free group sessions on Saturdays. Someone donated a full set of weighted blankets. Another person dropped off sensory-friendly art supplies with no note, just the words, "For Lila's Place," written in Sharpie on the box. And still, Lila never heard the name of the man who'd left the tip blank that night at the diner, who had walked away without applause, who had sparked the sequence. But some part of her didn't need to. One morning, she stood at the front window of the center, sipping tea as the kids filtered in. The light was soft, the air crisp, and something in her heart settled with clarity. This wasn't a beginning. This was a return to who she'd always been, to who someone else, quietly, respectfully, had reminded her she still could be. And as she stepped into the hallway to greet the families arriving, she whispered something to herself. Not a prayer, not a promise, just a quiet thank you, to a man she never expected to meet again, and to a gift he gave without ever needing to be thanked. There was no banner outside, no string quartet or social media countdown, no buzz, no live coverage, just a cracked sidewalk, a handwritten welcome sign taped to the front door, and a folding table by the entrance covered in mismatched snacks. Some store-bought, some wrapped in foil and delivered by neighbors who had no money but believed in fresh banana bread. It was the softest of openings, and somehow that made it feel more real. The air still smelled faintly of fresh paint. The windows, cleaned just 2 days ago by a local teen and his grandfather, sparkled against the morning sun. Inside, the walls held laughter from earlier rehearsals, practice days, volunteer meetings, dry runs where the team had walked the halls over and over, imagining who might sit here, cry there, or find comfort somewhere else. Lila stood by the entrance with Brenna, holding a small clipboard, not because she needed to track anything, but because it gave her hand something to do. Her heart was thudding like it used to when she walked into classrooms for presentations in college, before everything had changed. A woman approached with 2 small boys clinging to each side of her coat. She looked around, as though unsure she was allowed inside. Lila smiled, stepped forward, and opened the door. "Come in," she said. "This is for you." The woman hesitated, then stepped over the threshold. Within minutes, the 2 boys were nestled in a reading nook with picture books, and their mother sat in the corner with a paper cup of coffee, blinking back tears she didn't try to explain. More people followed, a father pushing a stroller and juggling a backpack, an older woman with a cane and a quiet presence, 2 teenage girls who didn't say hello but didn't walk away either. Lila greeted everyone the same way, with eye contact, a name tag if they wanted one, and no pressure. A bulletin board beside the main hallway offered a few simple cards. "You're not alone. Welcome home. Take what you need, leave what you can." By noon, the box beneath it, originally filled with spare socks, journals, and small fidget toys, was half empty. Lila moved from room to room, never staying too long in one place, but never rushing either. She read The Invisible String to 3 children curled up on beanbags. She crouched beside a boy building a Lego city, nodded when he pointed out the bridge. She spoke quietly to a teenage girl sketching something jagged in the margins of a notebook. And still, it felt like she wasn't doing enough. Brenna touched her arm at one point and whispered, "It's working." Lila looked around the room. A toddler giggled as a volunteer made animal shapes out of felt. Eli, across the room, was helping hang a banner that read, "This place is yours." A young man with Down syndrome was helping distribute snacks with practiced care. And a mother, the same one from earlier, was now smiling as she braided her son's hair while he quietly colored beside her. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Later in the day, in the smaller group room they'd designated for teens, Lila sat in a semicircle with 3 newcomers, 2 girls and 1 boy. None of them looked directly at her. Arms folded, legs crossed tightly. Silence like concrete. She introduced herself, not with credentials or rehearsed phrases, but simply with, "My name's Lila. This room is for you." No one replied. So she added, "We don't take attendance. We don't keep files unless you want help. And we don't assume anything." Still no response. So she stopped talking and just waited. After 15 long minutes, one girl asked softly, "Is this like counseling?" Lila shook her head. "Not today, not unless you want it. Today it's just space." That was enough. They stayed. When the others left, one girl lingered. 15, maybe 16. She looked at the ground for a while, backpack slung low on one shoulder, biting the inside of her cheek. Then she stepped forward and gave Lila a hug. Quick and stiff, but real. "You don't talk like the others," she said. Lila blinked, surprised. "You talk like you've been through it." Lila placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered back, "I have." The girl nodded once, then walked out. Lila stood still for a long time in that quiet room, watching the dust float through the golden light, until Brenna poked her head in. "There's a mom outside asking if we'll be open tomorrow," she said. Lila smiled. "Tell her yes." At the end of the day, Lila stood by the door as the last guests filed out. A child pressed a drawing into her hand. It was a crooked house with a sun and a small bridge. Above it, in pink crayon, it read, "This is my safe place." Lila swallowed hard and looked out onto the street as the sun dipped below the rooftops. No headlines, no crowds, just families who had walked in heavy and were leaving a little lighter, and a woman who once asked for $50, now standing at the doorway of something she had helped build with her whole story. Not for attention, but for healing. She closed the door softly, walked the hallway once more, then turned off the lights room by room. She stopped for a moment at the bulletin board. 3 more cards were missing. One read, "I found it." Another, "I stayed." The third, "I didn't know I needed this." Lila took a deep breath. She didn't need a speech or applause. This was enough. The door was locked behind her. But something had just begun. It began quietly, like most ripples do. A local journalist for the Albuquerque Community Journal had visited the new trauma center on a quiet Tuesday morning. She was doing a roundup of community programs funded with anonymous grants, and someone had whispered, "You should check out the place where the waitress used to work." She came, stayed an hour, and left without taking notes. But 3 days later, a small piece ran under the human interest section, where the kids go when no one else knows. There was no fanfare, just a story. It described the warm light, the way children colored without being asked, how a woman named Lila Monroe didn't wear a title or name badge, but seemed to know every child's rhythm by heart. It might have ended there, but a parenting blogger in Minnesota saw the article and reposted it with the caption, "Not all heroes wear capes. Some just open the door and say, 'Come in.'" By morning, the post had spread beyond the blog. Teachers began sharing it, then therapists, then exhausted parents who typed through tears at midnight. And then the emails began, hundreds of them, from strangers in cities Lila had never visited. "How did you start? Can I create one in my town? What kind of building do I need? Is there a guide? We don't have anything like this where I live. Could we borrow your idea?" Lila sat on her bed reading them, her laptop open beside a cup of cold tea, Eli sleeping in the next room. Some messages were long, others were just a single sentence. One woman simply wrote, "I'm ready, I just need a name." Lila didn't know how to answer them. She had no franchise, no license, no curriculum. She had a rented building, a folder of lesson plans scribbled on napkins, and a lot of nights filled with tears and hope. But what she had, they needed. So she called Brenna. "We should reply," Lila said. "We will," Brenna replied. But not alone. That same afternoon, Keanu's team received a short email from Brenna. No plea, just a line of gratitude and a request. "We've got people asking for seeds," it read. "Any chance we can help them plant?" By evening, the quiet machinery of Keanu's foundation was in motion, preparing resource packets, care-based programming guides, startup kits, funding for initial supply runs. But every label said the same thing: property of no one, use freely, share forward. One of the first kits went to a woman named Jody in Kansas City. She had 3 kids, a part-time job, and a husband who worked nights. Her youngest, a girl named Ava, had selective mutism, and spent most of her days hiding in closets at school. Jody had read the story about Lila through a friend's shared post on social media. She hadn't even finished the article before tears welled up. In her message to the contact form on the Lila's Place website, she wrote, "I don't have a license. I'm not a therapist. I just know what it's like to watch a child disappear in plain sight. I want to try." 3 days later, she received a cardboard box with no logos. Inside were laminated sheets outlining how to set up a calm corner, ways to hold space without forcing conversation, how to gently guide children through trauma-informed routines. There was a list of books, a pack of sensory toys, and a handwritten letter that read, "You don't need permission to create peace, but just in case, here it is." LM. Word spread further. A school counselor in rural Montana turned her office into a miniature version of Lila's Place, renaming it the Lantern Room. A youth pastor in Oakland opened his church basement twice a week, calling it Tuesday Light. A retired teacher in Tennessee transformed a spare barn into a quiet after-school zone where teens could nap, color, or just be still. None of them were professionals in the traditional sense, but all of them understood what it meant to carry a story too big to tell, and what it meant to make space for others to let theirs unfold. Soon, someone created a hashtag, Lila's Place. Photos began showing up across the internet. A small girl hugging a therapy dog beside a hand-painted sign that read, "Safe Here." A teenage boy sitting at a picnic table under fairy lights, scribbling lyrics in a notebook. A bulletin board in a community library filled with sticky notes bearing messages like, "I made it through this week. I'm scared, but I came anyway. Thanks for not asking me to talk." And through it all, Lila remained offline. She turned down interviews, politely declined profiles. A national talk show requested a virtual appearance. She replied, "If I go on camera, the story stops being about the kids." She wasn't afraid of attention. She was afraid of distortion, because this wasn't a campaign. It was a calling, and it belonged to everyone. The requests didn't stop, neither did the stories. A veteran in New Jersey converted his garage into a peer-led space for kids with PTSD. A principal in Phoenix printed out Lila's quote, "You don't need to fix people, you just need to make them feel safe," and taped it above every classroom door. A teenager in Vermont filmed herself turning an unused janitor's closet into a private reading lounge for students overwhelmed by noise. She called it the Pause Closet. Each space looked different. Some were elegant, some were makeshift, some barely had furniture. But every single one carried the same core element: intention. And each of them, whether a quiet room in Idaho or a library annex in Baltimore, was in its own way a branch of something bigger than a center in Albuquerque. It was a movement made not of names, but of needs. Lila's team, now supported by Keanu's foundation, added a downloadable starter pack to their website. It included templates, activities, trauma-informed guidelines, and a note that simply said, "You don't have to be an expert, you just have to show up. No monetization, no ads, no fees, just access." A week later, someone published a digital map, the Lila's Place Network. It dotted across the US, then began to stretch across oceans. A woman in Ireland launched one in an old bakery. A group of nurses in South Africa added a Lila's Corner to their pediatric hospital. A refugee camp in Greece turned a shipping container into a haven, with drawings on the walls and coloring books on shelves. The map didn't list founders, it listed coordinates. Because the heart of it wasn't who started it, it was why. Back in Albuquerque, Lila printed the map and pinned it to the wall in her office. Her hands trembled as she did it. Not because she was proud, though she was, but because she was overwhelmed by how far a single moment could travel. One question, one voice. Would you be willing to tip me $50? Not for greed, not for show, but because someone dared to ask, and someone else chose to listen. From that listening came a door, and from that door came a ripple. Not a wave, not a flood, a ripple, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but changes the shore forever. The bell above the door jingled the same way it always had. The same chipped counter, the same faded booths, the same scent of burnt coffee lingering in the air like memory. Lila didn't even look up at first. It had been a long shift, and the Friday lunch crowd had left behind half-sigil mugs and crumpled receipts. She wiped down the table closest to the door with slow, practiced movements. Then she heard the boots. Not hurried, not heavy, just familiar. When she finally looked, her breath caught. At the far corner of the diner, seated in the very booth he had used months ago, was the man from that night. Same quiet presence, same eyes that noticed more than they said. He wasn't wearing sunglasses this time. No helmet. Just a plain gray jacket, a loose black tee, and the kind of stillness that didn't demand attention, but always received it. Lila blinked. "Keanu?" He looked up and smiled. "Hi, Lila." She laughed, almost nervously. "I never thought I'd see you again." "I owed you a meal," he said. "You once asked me for $50. I figure the least I can do is cover a burger and fries." She walked toward him, still stunned. "You came back?" "I was passing through," he said softly. "And I remembered this place. I remembered you." She sat across from him slowly, as if unsure if it was allowed. She was off shift in 10 minutes anyway. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, like the kind of quiet between people who had both walked long roads and stopped to rest near the same tree. "You know," she said finally, "I almost didn't ask that night." Keanu tilted his head. "But you did." "I didn't expect anything. I just needed to try." "I know," he said. "That's why it mattered." She studied him, brow furrowed. "You didn't leave a tip that night." "I know," he said again. She smiled, but there was no bitterness in it. "I've thought about that more than I should have." "I didn't leave money," he said, "because I wasn't sure if that was what was really being asked." Lila leaned back in the booth, her apron folded on her lap now. The diner was mostly empty, just a couple of older regulars near the window and a teenager scrolling through her phone at the counter. "I didn't want pity," Lila said after a while. "I know," Keanu replied. "I wasn't even sure I wanted help. I think I just didn't want to feel invisible anymore." He nodded, tracing a finger along the edge of his mug. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't the struggle. It's the silence around it." She smiled faintly, eyes drifting toward the door. "You changed everything, you know." He looked up. "No, I didn't." "You did," she said. "You walked back in that night, you asked my name, you listened." "I didn't start that center," he said gently. "You did." She paused. "Maybe, but you made it possible." Keanu sipped his coffee. "That's the thing about possibility. It's not something you give, it's something you recognize." For a long moment, they didn't speak. Outside, a truck passed. A wind chime somewhere down the street rang once. "I saw the map," he said quietly. "The one with all the dots, the one that started with you." Lila looked down at her hands. "It's not mine." "It is," he said, "and it isn't. That's how you know it's good." She laughed. "You sound like someone who's thought about this a lot." "I have," he admitted. "For a long time, I thought purpose came from finishing things, roles, projects, saving something. But lately, I think it comes from witnessing, from being willing to be there when someone else starts something real." Lila swallowed. Her voice was softer now. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come back in that night?" "I do," he said, "and I don't." He looked at her across the table, his gaze calm but full. "Because some part of me knows I would have come back eventually. I just didn't know it yet. Lila blinked back sudden tears. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. They smiled, and for a moment, the clatter of plates, the humming of a distant jukebox, the low conversation of strangers, all faded. Just two people, two lives that collided in a single moment of quiet courage. No fame, no followers, no debt, just presence. Their meal arrived without fuss, just grilled cheese, tomato soup, and fries. Simple food with a strange kind of weight between them. Lila picked at her plate, more focused on the conversation than the taste. Keanu, too, ate slowly, methodically, like someone unbothered by time. Eventually, Lila asked the question that had lived in the back of her mind since the first night. "Way, Mimi?" Keanu looked at her. "What do you mean?" "There are so many people, so many causes, so many stories more tragic than mine." He took a deep breath. "It wasn't about tragedy," he said. "It was about timing. You didn't cry. You didn't sell a story. You didn't even expect an answer, but you asked anyway." She looked down. "You didn't want help. You wanted dignity, and you were brave enough to speak it out loud." Lila's hands tightened slightly around her mug. "I felt like I was slipping. Not all at once, but in inches. And that night, I think I just needed to say it, to someone who might actually see me." "I did see you," Keanu said, "and I didn't know what to do. So I waited until I did. And now?" He smiled. "Now I'm just here to thank you." She looked surprised. "Thank me?" "You reminded me that not every story needs to be dramatic to matter," he said. "Sometimes the quiet ones, the ones born from small moments, those are the ones that live longest." Lila stared at him, unsure what to say. Keanu reached into his jacket and placed something on the table. It was a folded envelope. "What's this?" "Something that belongs to you," he said, "from a few of the kids who've passed through Lila's place. A few drawings, some words, a little reminder." Lila opened the envelope and pulled out half a dozen cards, each in crayon or pencil. One showed a stick figure in a cape with Lila on the front. Another was just the words, "Thank you for not giving up on us." She pressed the envelope to her chest, eyes shimmering. "I don't know what to do with all this," she whispered. "You already did it," he said. "Now just keep showing up." The check arrived. Keanu paid in cash and left a generous tip, but this time without ceremony. As they stood outside by the motorcycles and pickup trucks, Lila looked up at the sky and smiled. "I never asked for a miracle," she said. "And you didn't need one," Keanu replied. They shook hands and hugged and went their separate ways. But the ripple continued. They sat in the booth for an hour after the plates had been cleared. No rush, no interruptions. The hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional clang from the kitchen were the only background noise. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting amber streaks through the window blinds. Keanu leaned forward, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug, elbows resting on the table. "How's Eli doing?" Lila's face lit up immediately. "He's good, actually. Better than good." Keanu raised an eyebrow with a gentle smile. "Tell me." She pulled out her phone and tapped through a few pictures. Then she turned the screen toward him. There was Eli, in his wheelchair, arms raised triumphantly in front of a large bulletin board filled with comic sketches. The drawing at the center showed a boy in a bright blue cape, seated in a high-tech wheelchair, with lightning shooting from the wheels. "He's making a comic," Lila said. "He calls the main character Torque, says it sounds stronger than his own name." Keanu studied the image. He looks proud. "Helm is, he says," her voice softened. "He says it's easier now to believe in superpowers." Keanu looked up at her. "Maybe because he's got one nearby." Lila rolled her eyes playfully, but her cheeks reddened. "Hanselin asked me last week if I believed in second chances," she continued. "I told him I wasn't sure if this counts as a second chance or just a new beginning we never saw coming." He nodded slowly, letting the words settle. She reached into her apron pocket. "I almost forgot. I wanted to show you this." She pulled out a folded paper, a page torn from a sketchbook. It was another drawing by Eli. This one showed a girl with tired eyes and strong arms, holding the world on her back. "It's me," she said quietly. "He drew this 2 nights ago. Said I reminded him of Atlas, but better looking." Keanu smiled, then reached into his coat. "I brought something too," he said. "Wasn't sure if I'd give it to you, but now feels right." He placed a folded sheet of notepad paper on the table. The edges were worn, the ink slightly faded. Lila looked at him. "It's the note I wrote that night," he said, "after I left the diner." She picked it up gently and unfolded it. The handwriting was precise, steady. The message was simple. The people who ask quietly are the ones we should hear the loudest. Lila didn't say anything at first. She just held the paper like it weighed more than it should, like it had waited months for her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the curve of the final word. Loudest. She blinked slowly, lips parting, but no words coming out just yet. Across the table, Keanu waited. He didn't rush her. He didn't fill the silence. And maybe that's why it meant more. "You kept this?" she asked finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I wrote it after I got back to my motel," he said. "Didn't know why, just needed to." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "You didn't say a word that night. Not about this. Not about what you were thinking." He gave a small shrug. "I've found that silence tells the truth when words don't know how." Lila let out a soft laugh, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I kept thinking, after that night, maybe I scared you off. Maybe I crossed some line." "No," he said immediately. "You didn't scare me. You reminded me." "Of what?" He held her gaze. "That sometimes strength isn't loud, and pain doesn't always scream, but dignity whispers. And it's the rarest sound in the world." The booth went quiet again, but this time the silence was warm. Lila folded the note carefully, gently, as if it were parchment from a time long past. Then she placed it into her apron pocket. "I'm framing that," she said softly. "Good," Keanu replied. "I think it was always meant for you." The door chimed again, and a few new customers shuffled in. Lila glanced at the clock on the wall. "My break's over in 5. I should get going too." Neither of them moved just yet. Lila looked down at her hands. "I always thought there'd be some big moment, you know? A news story, a headline, something dramatic." Keanu smiled. "Sometimes the smallest questions rewrite the biggest parts of us." Lila nodded. "I still don't understand why you came back," she said after a beat. Keanu leaned back, thoughtful. "I came back," he said, "because something stayed with me that night. Not your question, not your story, but your silence after I left." Lila looked up. "You didn't chase. You didn't try again. You just let it go." She nodded slowly. "Because I didn't want to be someone's regret." "You weren't," Keanu said. "You were someone's beginning." And just like that, the conversation found its finish. Not with a conclusion, but with a truth neither needed to explain. As Keanu stood to leave, he touched the edge of the table once, like a silent thank you. Lila smiled. "Same booth next time?" He grinned. "Same booth." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with that soft, familiar chime. She returned to work. But in her apron pocket was a folded note, and in her heart, the echo of a conversation that never really ended. The library meeting room wasn't big, just a circle of folding chairs, a table with snacks, and one old projector flickering against a blank wall. But to Eli, it felt like a stadium. He wheeled himself to the front of the room, hands steady on his chair, notebook balanced on his lap. Around him, a dozen kids between 9 and 15 clutched sketchbooks, markers, and wide-eyed questions. The sign outside read, "Create your own hero." A free workshop. With Lila Monroe. Lila stood at the back, one hand covering her mouth, the other resting against the doorframe. Eli cleared his throat and began. "So," he said, "I'm Eli. I'm not famous, I'm not a professional artist, but I love stories, and I love comics. And I think everyone here probably has at least one character inside them waiting to get out." A few kids nodded. One girl in oversized glasses raised her hand. "Did you get famous because of your sister?" Eli laughed, the sound light and bright. "No," he said. "We got brave because of each other." Lila felt her knees go weak, but she didn't cry. Yet. Eli continued. "My sister was my first hero. She did the hard things, worked long shifts, missed school for me, lost sleep, missed parties, gave up everything." He paused, glancing toward the back. "And still made me laugh on the worst days." A small boy leaned forward. "Did you always know you were going to be strong like her?" Eli smiled. "I didn't feel strong, not for a long time. But strength isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up anyway." The kids scribbled notes, nodding, wide-eyed. Keanu stepped into the room quietly, standing beside Lila. He didn't say anything at first. Just watched Eli, pride clear in his gaze. "It's got your courage," Keanu whispered. Lila shook her head slowly. Her voice was low but certain. "No. He gave it back to me." Keanu nodded, understanding in his eyes. The workshop rolled on. Eli began helping the kids sketch their characters. One girl created a hero who could turn invisible when she was scared, then slowly learned how to be seen again. A boy invented a superhero who couldn't fly, but could lift the weight of other people's memories. Another wrote about a quiet janitor who fixed broken things in secret after everyone left the building. Every story was a mirror. Every character carried pain. And every kid walked out a little taller. After the workshop, the kids lined up with their drawings. Not to show off, not to compete, just to share. Eli looked at every page. He asked questions. He nodded. He gave each child the same gift his sister once gave him, a space where their story could be more than survival. A little girl named Keisha handed him a page covered in crayon swirls. "Mine's called Wonder Wind," she said. "She's fast and quiet, like my mom." Eli grinned. "That's the best name I've heard all day." When the last kid left, arms full of drawings and juice boxes, the room finally emptied. The air still held the energy of something sacred. Lila walked over and knelt beside Eli's chair. She didn't speak, just rested her hand on his arm. "You were amazing," she said. He shrugged. "I was just talking. You were leading." He looked down, suddenly shy. "I didn't think I'd ever get to do something like this." "You didn't think you'd live like this," she whispered. He nodded, eyes glassy. "But you are," she said, "and you're showing others how." Keanu stayed a few steps back, giving them space. But when Lila looked up at him, he stepped forward. "Can I show you something?" Keanu asked Eli. Eli nodded. Keanu pulled out a small black notebook from his coat pocket. He flipped to a page near the middle and handed it over. "I write down names," he said. "People who change things for me." Quietly, Eli read the list. Lila, Eleanor, Bright, Riley, Eli. He looked up, stunned. "That's me?" Keanu nodded. "That's you." Eli blinked hard and whispered. He handed the notebook back slowly, carefully, like it was made of something fragile. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "You already did, just by being you." Lila reached into her bag and pulled out a folded flea from the community center. "We're going to run monthly panels now," she said, "not just for comics, for art, music, writing. We're calling them—" She smiled and looked at Eli. Eli's voice. He looked shocked. "You're naming them after me?" "No," she said. "After what you gave us. A voice we didn't know we were waiting to hear." The three of them stood together, surrounded by chairs and sketchbooks and soft echoes of children's laughter. The sun began to set outside the library windows, and in that fading light, the quiet kind of legacy grew stronger. Not in applause, but in presence. The hall was quiet as the ribbon was cut. No balloons, no press cameras, just the murmur of local voices and the rustle of folding chairs being adjusted in a modest community wing at the edge of town. The plaque above the new entrance read simply, "Lila Monroe Resource Room, for those who carry quiet burdens." The letters weren't gold or flashy. They were carved into brushed steel, backlit by soft light that spilled into the freshly painted hallway beyond. Lila stood to the side, not at the podium. She wasn't dressed up for the occasion, just a navy blouse, jeans, and her favorite gray sweater Eli once gave her for Christmas. Her hair was pulled back, her expression calm. She hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't wanted one. The community center director Brenna took the mic at the front of the room and cleared her throat gently. "Today," she began, "we open more than a therapy wing. We open a space that was born from a question that most people would have been too afraid or too tired to ask." Lila glanced around the small gathering. Parents, volunteers, teachers, counselors, and a few kids from the very first group who'd ever entered Lila's place. Brenna continued, her voice steady. "This room, and the ones that follow it, were not created by a foundation or a committee. They were sparked by one person who dared to believe that asking for help was not weakness, that showing up day after day, when no one's watching, is its own kind of heroism." There were a few murmurs of agreement, heads nodding. Lila felt Eli's fingers squeeze hers, and she looked down at him sitting beside her, dressed in a blazer over a superhero t-shirt. Then Brenna held up a folded note. "We received a message to be read today. It's from someone who couldn't attend, but I believe you'll all know his name." A ripple of quiet moved through the chairs. Brenna unfolded the paper. "Sometimes," she read, "the person who asks once is the one who teaches the rest of us how to give forever." Lila's lips parted slightly. Her eyes filled, but didn't fall. Brenna looked toward her, smiling. "With respect, love, and recognition, this space now carries your name. But your legacy was never about ownership. It was about invitation." Lila didn't move. She didn't step forward. She didn't wave. She just smiled, small, honest, and full, and clutched her brother's hand a little tighter. After the ceremony, people lingered. No one rushed to leave. Some approached Lila quietly, offering hugs, handshakes, or just simple thanks. A mother held her daughter's hand as they stood near the entrance. "Sean used to cry every morning," the mother said. "Now she sings before school. I don't know what happened, but thank you." Lila could only nod. The little girl reached up and touched the brushed steel plaque. "And said I was brave," the child whispered. "Now I believe her." Lila felt something shift in her chest, a soft ache that wasn't pain anymore. It was memory turning into something gentler, something she could carry without flinching. Later, the doors to the new therapy wing opened. The rooms were warm and inviting, painted in soft colors. Murals lined the walls, drawn by local children. One featured a superhero in a wheelchair flying above a city skyline. Another showed a pair of hands holding a small house filled with light. Eli rolled beside her, his fingers brushing the edge of one drawing. "That's torque," he said, smiling. "They even got the wheels right." "Damn it, Lila," Lila said, her voice thick with pride. She turned to him. "Are you proud of today?" Eli shrugged, then grinned. "Only if you are." She kissed the top of his head. "I am." A volunteer brought out a tray of cookies and juice. Kids laughed. Staff members toured the new rooms, quietly exchanging ideas, already discussing how to make them better. But Lila stood back, watching. She didn't need to lead every moment. She had learned how to trust others with the torch. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the windows, Lila and Eli made their way toward the exit. Outside, a small bench had been installed beneath a flowering tree. A single bronze plaque sat at its base, in honor of the ones who stayed, even when no one noticed. Eli read it aloud, then looked at his sister. "That sounds like you." "No," Lila said, sitting down beside him. "That sounds like all of us." As she approached, across the lot, she spotted a figure leaning against a motorcycle. Keanu. He didn't wave, didn't call out. But when their eyes met, he nodded once. She nodded back. No speeches, no spotlight. Just presence. Just a promise kept. And as Lila looked back at the building with her name on it, doors open, lights on, voices rising inside, she didn't see her name. She saw what it had become. A place where stories began again. A place where asking once became enough to change everything. Keanu sat in his quiet study, pen in hand, the edges of his journal softened by time. He opened to a blank page, stared at it for a long moment, then began to write. Some people ask not because they expect a yes, but because it's the only truth left to speak. The sentence sat at the top of the page, unmoving. He tapped the pen against the wood, thinking not just of Lila, but of every person he had passed by in silence, unaware that they might have had a truth waiting to be heard. He continued, "And what we do with that truth, that is up to us." The words flowed, quietly, like the voice of memory returning. "I've stood on movie sets, in front of cheering crowds, beside presidents and across from grieving strangers. But the moment I remember most? A tired woman in a dim booth asking for $50, not for herself, but for someone who couldn't ask." He paused. Aim never raised her voice, never made a scene, just asked, once, and then let it go. That is courage. Keanu looked up from the journal, staring out the window as the sun melted behind the hills. Then he wrote something just for those listening. We often look for heroes in the loudest places, in headlines, in victory speeches, in the middle of applause. But sometimes they live in the quietest corners, behind diner counters, in apartments lit by hope instead of electricity, in small voices that still dare to ask, even when the world forgets how to answer. He underlined the next line. She masked once. That was enough. A moment passed. Keanu closed the journal and breathed deeply, the kind of breath you take when something inside you finds stillness. Not peace, not closure, just clarity. Then, with a voice that held every mile of the journey, every memory of Lila and Eli and all the quiet lives that changed his own, he asked the questions. Have you ever had to ask for something, not because you wanted help, but because hope was slipping away? He let the question hang. Or, he continued gently, has someone ever answered you, not with money, but with belief? He waited. Then came the final message. If so, you already know what it means to be heard. A pause. And if you haven't yet, keep going. Because sometimes the quietest ask becomes the loudest legacy. Now it was your turn. Have you ever made a request that changed your life? Did someone answer you with faith when you expected silence? Share your story in the comments. And what quiet act of courage should we explore next? Subscribe to follow every step of the journey.